Cheap, and tasting faintly of copper and bad decisions, the gin offered little comfort. Harper had only meant to text Harry a 4-word plea. "Come get me, please." It was supposed to be an escape from the aggressive date hovering outside her apartment door, but her thumb slipped on the cracked screen. 10 minutes later, the knock that came wasn't Harry's erratic tapping, nor the whiny pounding of her date. Instead, 3 heavy measured strikes rattled the cheap wood. She opened it to find her boss, the man who ran half the city's underworld. The linoleum floor of her kitchen was peeling in the corners. She knew this because she was currently sitting on it, her back pressed hard against the flimsy front door of her apartment, staring at a curled edge of yellowed plastic. Outside in the hallway, Dave was still talking. "Harper, come on." His voice filtered through the wood, muffled but slurred with the IPA he'd been drinking all night. "Don't be a tease. I paid for dinner. Just open the door for a second." She squeezed her eyes shut. The hallway smelled of old carpet cleaner and boiling cabbage, but all she could taste was the acrid tang of gin and her own rising panic. She had known Dave for exactly 3 weeks. They worked in the same building. He was in accounting on the 4th floor. She was an executive assistant on the top floor. He had seemed boring. Boring was exactly what she wanted. Boring was safe. But boring had turned into persistent, and persistent had turned into him wedging his foot in her doorframe when she tried to say goodnight, forcing her to shove him back with a burst of adrenaline and slam the deadbolt home. Now he wouldn't leave. Her hands were shaking as she pulled her phone from her cheap synthetic purse. The screen was spiderwebbed with cracks from dropping it on the subway 2 months ago. She needed Harry. Her older brother was a bartender 3 blocks away. He owned a baseball bat and had a profound lack of patience for guys who didn't understand the word no. Her thumbs felt thick and numb. The alcohol in her system was a heavy, muddy weight, slowing her thoughts. She opened her messages. She didn't even bother putting her contacts in order. She just typed HA into the search bar, tapped the first contact that popped up with a green icon, and typed, "Come get me. He won't leave. Please." She hit send. The little green bubble appeared. She let out a breath she'd been holding, letting her head thump back against the door. "Harry's going to kill him," she muttered to the empty kitchen. A heavy thud against the door made her jump. "Harper!" Dave whined, his voice taking on an ugly, sharp edge. "I know you're sitting right there. This is bullshit." She looked down at her phone to see if Harry had replied. The screen lit up. Read 11:42 p.m. She blinked. Harry had an Android. Harry's bubbles were green, but he kept his read receipts turned off because he was paranoid about data tracking. A cold sweat broke across the back of her neck. She squinted at the cracked glass, rubbing her thumb over the fracture line that obscured the top of the screen. She tilted the phone. The name at the top of the message thread wasn't Harry. It was Hale. Roman Hale. The breath evaporated from her lungs. Her stomach plummeted so fast she felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Roman Hale was her boss. He was the CEO of Hale Logistics, which was a very neat, very sanitized title for a man who effectively controlled the docks, the unions, and a vast shadowy network of imports that she deliberately never asked questions about. She managed his calendar. She ordered his black coffee. She scheduled his dry cleaning when his $1,000 suits came back smelling like ozone and copper. She was 26, drowning in student debt, and terrified of him. Everyone was. Roman was a man of agonizingly few words, possessing a stillness that felt less like peace and more like a predator waiting for a reason to strike. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. When someone disappointed him, they simply stopped working at the company. Sometimes they stopped living in the state. And she had just texted him at 11:42 p.m. on a Friday night, drunk, asking him to come get her. "No, no, no," she whispered frantically, stabbing at the message. She tried to pull up the menu to unsend it. The app froze. The little circle spun. Network error. She stared at the screen, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had to follow up. She had to say sorry, wrong number. She had to say I'm fine. It was meant for my brother. Before her trembling fingers could type a single letter, a gray text bubble popped up on the left side of the screen. Address. Just one word, no punctuation. She stared at it. He was awake. He was reading this. He was asking where she was. Her mind spun. She couldn't give Roman Hale her address. That was crossing a line that didn't just blur boundaries, it annihilated them. She was the mousy, invisible assistant who wore oversized cardigans to hide her figure and kept her eyes glued to her keyboard when his associates came into the office. She survived in his world by being part of the furniture. Another thud on the door. Dave kicked it this time. "I'm not leaving until you come out and talk to me like an adult, Harper." She flinched. The wood bowed slightly. The deadbolt was cheap. The screws were stripped. She had meant to ask the super to fix it 3 months ago. Before she could stop herself, driven by a primal, drunken cocktail of fear and sheer panic, she dropped a pin with her location and hit send. Her phone buzzed immediately. 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes were the longest of her life. She didn't move from the floor. The cold of the linoleum seeped through her thin tights, chilling her thighs. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms tightly around her legs, trying to make herself as small as possible. Outside the door, Dave had transitioned from angry to pathetic. He was leaning against the wood. She could hear the fabric of his jacket sliding against the paint. He was muttering to himself, complaining about women, about the money he spent on the steak dinner she barely managed to swallow. His voice was a grating, persistent drone in the quiet hallway. Inside her apartment, the silence was deafening. Her radiator gave a sad metallic clank. The smell of the cheap vanilla candle she had blown out hours ago lingered in the air, mixing with the smell of her own nervous sweat. What the hell had she done? Roman Hale didn't do favors. He didn't run errands. He had men for that. He had an army of broad-shouldered quiet men in dark suits who handled his problems. Why would he come here himself? Why did he even care? She was an employee. Replaceable. Maybe he sent someone else, she thought, grasping at straws. Maybe he just dispatched one of his drivers to pick me up. That had to be it. He was a ruthless businessman. But he wasn't entirely without a pragmatic sense of responsibility for his staff. She handled highly confidential schedules. Maybe he just viewed her as an asset that needed to be secured. 7 minutes passed. The alcohol in her blood was fighting a losing battle against the adrenaline. Her head throbbed. She felt gross. Her mascara was likely smudged under her eyes, and her hair, which he had painstakingly curled before this disastrous date, was falling flat and frizzy around her face. She was wearing a cheap black dress that suddenly felt way too tight and way too short. 8 minutes. I'm gonna call the cops, Harper. Dave slurred through the door. It was an empty threat, a stupid one. Go away, Dave, she croaked. Her voice was hoarse, pathetic. It didn't sound like a command. It sounded like a beggar. Make me, he sneered. 9 minutes. Then, the ambient noise of the building shifted. She lived on the 3rd floor. The stairs were directly across from her door. The stairwell door was heavy fire metal, and it always screeched when it opened. It screeched now. But there were no footsteps, not immediately. Dave stopped talking. She held her breath, pressing her ear flat against her own door. Hey, Dave's voice drifted through, sudden and defensive. What are you looking at? You live on this floor? Silence. I asked you a question, buddy, Dave said, trying to puff up his chest. She could hear the shift in his tone, the false bravado of a drunk man realizing he was suddenly not the biggest dog in the hallway. Step away from the door. The voice was low. It didn't echo. It didn't need to. It was a voice designed to absorb all the air in a room. It was the same voice that had calmly negotiated multi-million-dollar buyouts over the phone while she stood shivering in the corner with a notepad. It was Roman. He hadn't sent a driver. Excuse me? Dave laughed, but it was a nervous, breathy sound. I'm talking to my girlfriend. Mind your own business, pal. You have 5 seconds to walk down those stairs, Roman said. The cadence of his words was perfectly even. There was no anger in it. That was the terrifying part. It was just a statement of fact, like saying water is wet or you are about to stop breathing. Or what? Dave challenged, though she heard his shoes shuffle backward. There was a soft rustle of fabric, the distinct metallic clack of something heavy shifting. She didn't know what it was, but Dave clearly did. Dave let out a sharp, choked gasp. It sounded like all the air had been violently punched out of his lungs. 3 seconds, Roman said softly. Okay. Jesus, man, take it easy. She's a psycho anyway. I was just leaving. Dave's footsteps retreated rapidly, stumbling over the worn carpet of the hallway. The fire door wrenched open and slammed shut. Rapid, panicked footsteps echoed down the concrete stairwell, fading into the bowels of the building. Then, nothing. The silence in the hallway was heavier now, pressing against the cheap wood of her door. She was still sitting on the floor, trembling so violently her teeth were clicking together. She pressed her hand over her mouth to quiet the sound of her own harsh breathing. A shadow passed under the crack of her door. He was standing right outside. He didn't speak. He didn't call her name. 3 heavy, measured strikes. Knock, knock, knock. It felt like a summons to her own execution. She scrambled to her feet, her legs clumsy and numb from sitting on the floor. She braced herself against the wall, taking a deep breath that smelled of stale beer and fear, and reached for the deadbolt. The lock clicked. It sounded like a gunshot in the quiet apartment. She turned the knob and pulled the door open, keeping the chain lock on. A 2-inch gap revealed the hallway. Roman Hale was standing there. He looked entirely out of place in her dingy hallway with his flickering fluorescent bulb. He was wearing a charcoal wool overcoat, perfectly tailored, draped over a dark suit. The collar of his coat was turned up slightly against the damp autumn chill. He smelled like cold rain, expensive tobacco, and leather. His dark hair was slightly damp, falling out of its usual meticulous style, a single lock resting against his forehead. But his eyes, those dark, unreadable eyes, were exactly the same as they were in the boardroom. Cold, calculating, sweeping over her with a terrifyingly clinical precision. He looked at the chain lock stretching across the gap. Then he looked at her face. "Take the chain off, Harper," he said quietly. She didn't argue. Her fingers fumbled with the metal slide, slipping twice before finally freeing it. She pulled the door open the rest of the way, stepping back instinctively. Roman didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped over the threshold, his sheer physical presence immediately dwarfing her tiny entryway. The apartment suddenly felt suffocatingly small. He didn't close the door behind him right away. He stood there scanning the cramped space, the tiny kitchenette with its pile of unwashed coffee mugs, the scuffed linoleum, the single window looking out at a brick wall. When his inspection was complete, his gaze returned to her. She must have looked like a disaster. She could feel the flush of alcohol high on her cheeks. One of the straps of her cheap dress had slipped off her shoulder, and she was hugging her arms across her chest defensively. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," she stammered, hating how her voice shook. "No, I'm not hurt. He wouldn't leave." Roman finally reached back and pushed the door closed. The click of the latch was definitive, final. She was locked in a room with a man infinitely more dangerous than the one who had just fled. "Who was he?" Roman asked. He didn't take his coat off. He stood planted in the center of the rug she had bought at Target for $20, ruining its symmetry. "A guy," she said, realizing how stupid that sounded. "Dave, from accounting, over at the Sullivan firm." Roman's jaw tightened infinitesimally. A muscle jumped near his ear. "You went on a date with a desk clerk who traps women in their own apartments." It wasn't a question, but it felt like an accusation. "I didn't know he was going to do that," she fired back, a sudden spike of defensive anger piercing through her fear. He seemed normal. Normal is supposed to be safe. "Normal is a myth for people too lazy to look closer," Roman replied smoothly. He reached into his coat pocket. She tensed, but he only pulled out a heavy silver lighter. He didn't light it. He just turned it over and over in his long, calloused fingers. A nervous habit. She had seen him do it during hostile takeovers. "I'm sorry," she blurted out. The apology tasted like ash. "I didn't mean to text you. I meant to text my brother, Harry. The contacts. My screen is cracked. I was drunk. It was a mistake." Roman stopped turning the lighter. His thumb rested on the lid. He looked at her, and for the first time since he walked in, something flickered behind his eyes. It wasn't anger. It was something heavier, darker. "A mistake," he repeated, his voice dropping a fraction of an octave. "Yes. I'm so sorry, Mr. Hale. I know you're busy. I know you shouldn't be here. I'll resign on Monday if you want. I understand this is highly inappropriate." She was rambling, the words spilling out of her like water from a cracked dam. She couldn't handle the silence. She couldn't handle him looking at her like she was a puzzle. He hadn't decided whether to solve or smash. Roman took a slow step toward her. She held her ground, though her instincts screamed at her to back up into the kitchen counter. "You think I drove across the city in the rain at midnight because I care about appropriate?" he asked. His tone was stripped of its usual corporate polish. It sounded raw, grating. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I don't know why you came. You said, 'Come get me.'" He stopped less than 2 feet away. The smell of him was intoxicating, erasing the cheap smells of her apartment. "So I came. But I told you it was an accident." And if it hadn't been? Roman tilted his head. His eyes dropped to her mouth for a fraction of a second before snapping back to her eyes. If you had meant to text me. What then, Harper? He had never used her first name before. In 3 years, she had always been Ms. Hayes. Hearing her name in his mouth felt like touching a live wire. I wouldn't have, she whispered, looking down at his polished leather shoes. You're my boss. Look at me. It was a command. She raised her eyes. I don't leave my house for accidents, Harper, Roman said quietly. He pocketed the lighter. His hand reached out, hovering for an agonizing second, before his knuckles lightly grazed the skin of her bare shoulder, hooking beneath the fallen strap of her dress. He slowly pulled it back up into place. His knuckles were cold from the rain outside, but his fingertips burned through the cheap synthetic fabric. I saw the text, he continued, his voice barely above a murmur. I saw the fear in it, and I came, because the thought of someone else forcing his way through your door made me want to burn this entire building to the ground. The breath caught in her chest. The world tilted slightly on its axis. Now, Roman said, stepping back and severing the contact, instantly returning to the rigid, imposing figure he was seconds ago. Pack a bag. She blinked, whiplashed by the sudden change in directive. What? Why? Because your deadbolt is compromised. Your neighbor is a coward, and the idiot from accounting knows where you live. Roman checked the heavy watch on his left wrist. You are not staying here tonight. You have 2 minutes. I can't just leave with you, she protested, panic rising again, though it was a different kind of panic this time. Harper. He looked at her, a deep, tired sigh expanding his chest. I am not asking. You are currently in a state of shock, mildly intoxicated and unsafe. I am your employer. Consider this mandatory off-site relocation. That's not a real thing, she argued weakly. A ghost of a smirk touched the corner of his mouth. It was gone before she could be sure it was there. It is now. Pack, or I will pack for you. And I doubt either of us wants me going through your drawers. She stared at him, the absurdity of the situation warring with the bone-deep exhaustion she felt. She looked at the broken deadbolt. She looked at the dark street through her window. Then she looked at the Mafia boss standing in her living room, demanding she let him take care of her. She turned on her heel and walked toward her bedroom. 2 minutes, Mr. Hale. She threw over her shoulder. 1 minute and 45 seconds now, Ms. Hayes, he replied, and she didn't need to look back to know he was watching her go. The hallway was dead quiet when they stepped out of her apartment. She had a faded canvas duffel bag slung over her shoulder, stuffed haphazardly with pajamas, a change of clothes, and her toothbrush. The strap dug into her collarbone. Roman didn't offer to carry it. She was grateful for that. It anchored her, a heavy, tangible reminder that she was still a person with agency, even if she was currently following a crime lord down a dingy, flickering stairwell. Outside, the rain had turned into a steady, freezing drizzle. The streetlights bled across the slick black pavement. A black SUV idled at the curb, its headlights cutting through the fog. A man in a dark trench coat was leaning against the passenger side. As they approached, he didn't speak. He just straightened, opened the back door, and gave Roman a curt, barely there nod. She hesitated on the curb. The rain plastered her frizzy hair to her cheeks. Her stomach did a slow, sour roll, the gin and the adrenaline violently rejecting each other. Get in, Harper, Roman said. His hand hovered behind her back, not touching her, but projecting a wall of solid heat against the cold night air. She ducked into the cavernous interior. It smelled like expensive leather, ozone, and the faint, crisp scent of peppermint. The contrast to her cabbage-scented hallway was jarring. She slid across the seat, hugging her canvas bag to her chest. Roman climbed in beside her, and the heavy door thudded shut, sealing them inside a soundproof vault. The SUV pulled away from the curb immediately. The driver didn't ask for directions. She pressed her forehead against the cold-tinted glass, watching her neighborhood blur past. The neon sign of the corner bodega, the overflowing trash cans, the chained-up bicycles, it all felt a million miles away. Inside the car, the silence was a physical weight. Roman sat on the opposite side of the bench seat, his posture immaculate, illuminated only by the rhythmic, sweeping flash of passing streetlights. He was staring straight ahead. "Where are we going?" Her voice sounded thin, scraping against the quiet hum of the tires. "My residence," he answered flatly. Panic, sharp and bright, flared in her chest. "I can't go to your house. Take me to Harry's. My brother. He lives on 42nd and—" "I know where your brother lives, Ms. Hayes. I know what bar he tends, what time his shift ends, and that he keeps a Louisville Slugger under the counter." She whipped her head around to stare at him. The alcohol fog in her brain burned away, replaced by a cold, crystalline terror. "How do you know that?" Roman slowly turned his head to look at her. The shadows in the car made the sharp angles of his jaw look entirely unforgiving. "It is my business to know the liabilities of the people who handle my private schedules. Your brother has a temper and an arrest record for assault. If I take you there tonight, he will spend the next 3 hours hunting down the man who threatened you. He will likely find him. He will likely hurt him. And then your brother will go back to jail." She swallowed hard. Her throat felt like sandpaper. He was right. Harry was a live wire. If she walked into his apartment at midnight, shaking and smelling like cheap gin, he wouldn't ask questions. He'd just start swinging. "So, you're protecting Dave?" she asked, a bitter, cynical edge creeping into her voice. "I couldn't care less about Dave," Roman said, the name sounding like a slur in his mouth. "I am protecting your brother from himself, and I am ensuring you get to sleep in a secure environment where you don't have to listen to the lock rattle." She looked away, pulling her knees up slightly to wedge her cheap, muddy boots against the edge of the floor mat. She felt incredibly small. Her dress was wrinkled, her tights had a run in the left knee, and her makeup felt greasy. Sitting next to a man whose overcoat probably cost more than her annual salary, she was profoundly aware of her own messiness. "You didn't have to do this," she muttered to the window. "No, I didn't." He didn't elaborate. He didn't offer a platitude about caring for his employees. The lack of an excuse hung in the air between them, heavy and complicated. The rest of the drive was a blur of rain and quiet. She closed her eyes, letting the rhythmic thrum of the engine vibrate through her bones. She was exhausted, a deep, marrow-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with the hour and everything to do with the constant low-level anxiety of being broke, alone, and hunted by a man who couldn't take no for an answer. When the car finally slowed, she opened her eyes to see the heavy wrought-iron gates of a private parking garage sliding open. They were in a high-rise in the financial district. The garage was aggressively well lit and entirely empty, save for 3 other black SUVs parked in a defensive semicircle. "We're here," Roman said. He unbuckled his seatbelt. The metallic click echoed like a judge's gavel. The private elevator opened directly into his penthouse. There was no hallway, no buffer zone. Just the quiet hum of machinery, and then a cavernous expanse of dark wood, poured concrete, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-slick city grid. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a highly curated museum exhibit. Cold, imposing, beautiful, but entirely devoid of human warmth. There were no throw pillows, no framed photographs, no clutter. She stepped off the elevator, her wet boots squeaking obscenely against the polished hardwood. She cringed. Roman stepped past her, slipping off his overcoat and tossing it casually over the back of a minimalist leather sofa. Underneath, his suit jacket hugged the broad line of his shoulders. He loosened his tie, a dark muted silk, and popped the top button of his shirt. It was the most casual thing she had ever seen him do in 3 years, and it somehow made him look infinitely more dangerous. "Leave your bag," he said, gesturing vaguely to the floor. "The guest wing is down that hall. Second door on the left. The bathroom is stocked." She gripped the canvas strap tighter. "I'm fine right here." He stopped and turned back to her. His eyes did that sweeping assessment again, taking in her rigid posture, her white-knuckled grip on her bag, the way she was hovering near the elevator doors like she was calculating the drop down the shaft. "You're shaking," he observed. "I'm cold," she lied. She was sweating. Her heart was doing a frantic snare drum roll against her ribs. Roman didn't argue. He walked toward a massive, dark marble kitchen island. "Do you want a drink? Or something to eat? I imagine whatever dinner you had with the accountant didn't end with dessert." The casual cruelty of the observation stung. "I don't want anything from you." The words snapped out of her before she could filter them. It was the cynic in her, the girl who had spent her entire adult life navigating the jagged edges of a city that loved to chew people up. Men like Roman Hale didn't do favors without a ledger. There was always a cost. Roman paused, a glass pitcher of water halfway to a tumbler. He set it down very slowly. The ice clinked against the crystal, a sharp, clear sound. "Is that right?" he asked softly. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. She forced herself not to back up, digging the rubber soles of her boots into the floor. He stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head up to meet his gaze. She could smell the rain on his hair, the faint trace of scotch on his breath from earlier in the evening. "You asked me to come," he reminded her, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that she felt in her teeth. "You summoned me, Harper." "It was an accident," she hissed, her chest heaving. "I told you, I slipped." "A slip of the thumb," he murmured, his eyes dropping to her mouth again. The look was so heavy it felt like a physical touch. "But you didn't unsend it. You didn't correct it. You sent me your location." "Because I was terrified," she shot back, her voice cracking. The raw, ugly truth spilled out, unpolished and desperate. "Because he was kicking the door, and my lock is cheap, and I didn't want to be another stupid headline. I sent it because I knew you were the only person terrifying enough to make him run." Silence crashed over the room. She had practically yelled it. She had called her boss terrifying to his face. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the fallout, for the cold dismissal, for the realization that she had just signed her own termination papers. Instead, she heard a ragged exhale. She opened her eyes. Roman was staring at her, a muscle feathering along his jawline. The cold corporate mask had fractured. What lay beneath it wasn't anger. It was a dark, possessive intensity that made her breath catch. "You think I'm a monster," he said. It wasn't a question. "I think you're a man who breaks things when they get in his way," she whispered, her voice trembling. "And I don't want to be a thing you break." Roman's hand came up. She flinched, a tiny, involuntary twitch. He froze, his hand hovering inches from her face. A flash of genuine pain crossed his eyes, so quick she thought she imagined it. He slowly lowered his hand, balling it into a fist at his side. "I don't break what belongs in my house," he said roughly. He stepped back, putting a crucial 3 feet of air between them. The spell shattered, leaving her gasping in its wake. "Drink some water. Go to sleep. The door locks from the inside. No one is coming in." He turned on his heel and walked down the opposite hallway, the shadow swallowing him whole. She stood in the massive, silent living room for a long time, listening to the rain beat against the glass, acutely aware of the fact that she was entirely, irrevocably trapped, not by locked doors, but by the gravitational pull of the man who owned them. She woke up to the smell of coffee. Not the burnt, acidic drip she made in her tiny kitchen, but a rich, dark roast that smelled like chocolate and toasted earth. She groaned, burying her face in the pillows. The pillows were absurdly soft. Too soft. They felt like a trap designed to keep a person buried in a cocoon of unearned luxury. The sheets were heavy, cool, high-thread count cotton. She hated them. They reminded her of exactly where she was. Her head was pounding, a dull rhythmic throb at the base of her skull that punished her for the cheap gin. Her mouth tasted like copper and sleep. She rolled onto her back, staring at the ceiling. The guest room was a study in grayscale, slate walls, a charcoal rug, a solitary abstract painting that looked like a bruised storm cloud. The memories of the night before hit her in a sickening rush. The text, the knock, the drive. "You summoned me, Harper?" "Oh, God," she croaked into the empty room, dragging the heel of her hand down her face. She felt raw, exposed. She forced herself out of bed. She had slept in her oversized t-shirt and sweatpants, discarding the cheap dress in a crumpled heap on the floor. She grabbed it now, shoving it into her canvas bag. She needed to leave. She needed to get back to her crappy apartment, fix her lock with a piece of duct tape if she had to, and pretend none of this had happened. Monday morning, she would hand in her resignation, change her number, and disappear. It was the only logical, self-preserving move. She opened the guest room door. The penthouse was quiet, but the sheer gray morning light was pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She padded barefoot down the hallway, clutching her duffel bag like a shield. Roman was in the kitchen. He was sitting at the marble island, a laptop open in front of him, a steaming mug of black coffee at his elbow. He was wearing dark gray sweatpants and a fitted black t-shirt. She had never seen him in anything but a tailored suit. Seeing the heavy musculature of his arms, the slight dusting of dark hair on his forearms, the relaxed slouch of his shoulders, it felt intrusive. Like she was looking at something strictly confidential. He didn't look up from his screen as she approached, but his voice cut through the silence. "There's ibuprofen next to the coffee maker. Water is in the fridge." She stopped at the edge of the kitchen. "I don't need pills. I need to go home." He hit a key on his laptop, closed the lid with a soft snap, and finally turned to look at her. His eyes were clear, sharp, completely untouched by the exhaustion that was currently grinding her bones into dust. "Sit down, Harper." "No. Thank you for last night, Mr. Hale. Really, I appreciate the intervention, but I have errands to run and I'd like to leave now." Her voice was a little raspy, but she kept her chin up. She was trying for professional detachment, but wearing baggy sweatpants and sporting bedhead severely undercut her authority. "You can't go back to your apartment," he stated calmly, picking up his coffee mug. Her grip on the duffel bag tightened. "Excuse me? You don't get to dictate where I live." "Your lock is broken," Roman said, taking a slow sip. "The wood is splintered. The landlord is negligent. It's a security risk." "It's my security risk. I'll call a locksmith." "I already sent someone." She froze. "You what?" "I sent a team to your building at 6 this morning. They replaced the door. They reinforced the frame. They installed a Grade 1 deadbolt and a secondary biometric lock." He set the mug down, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "They also packed the rest of your clothes and your toiletries. The boxes are being delivered to a secure corporate apartment in Midtown as we speak." Her mouth fell open. Her brain struggled to process the sheer audacity, the terrifying efficiency of what he had just done. He hadn't just rescued her. He had completely dismantled her life and rearranged it while she slept. "Are you insane?" The words exploded out of her. The fear was gone, completely consumed by a sudden, blinding rage. "You broke into my apartment? You packed my underwear?" "I didn't pack anything," Roman said, his voice lowering, a warning edge slipping into his tone. "A female associate handled your personal items, and I didn't break in. The door was practically open." "You have no right." She threw her canvas bag onto the floor. It hit the hardwood with a pathetic smack. "You are my boss. You sign my paychecks. That does not give you ownership of my life. You don't get to just pack me up in a box and ship me to a new address because you decided my old one was inconvenient." She was breathing hard, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She expected him to yell back. She expected the cold, ruthless mob boss to finally snap and put her in her place. Instead, Roman stood up. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace that was infinitely more terrifying than sudden violence. He walked around the island, stopping directly in front of her. The sheer size of him blocked out the morning light. "You are right," he said softly. "I have no right." She blinked, thrown off balance by the concession. "Then why did you do it?" "Because—" Roman reached out, and this time she didn't flinch. His large, calloused hand cupped the side of her face. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone, the touch startlingly gentle. "Because the thought of you walking back into that hallway, looking over your shoulder, terrified, in your own home. It is unacceptable to me." "It's not your job to accept it," she whispered, her anger faltering, melting under the heat of his palm against her skin. "No," he agreed, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. His eyes darkened, stripping away the last remnants of the CEO, leaving only the man who ruled the shadows. "It stopped being a job the moment you texted me to come get you. You crossed the line, Harper. You opened the door. You don't get to pretend you want to close it now." "I'm resigning," she breathed, trying to ignore the way her pulse was hammering against his fingertips. "On Monday." Roman leaned down, his mouth hovering a fraction of an inch from her ear. She could feel the heat of his breath against her neck, smelling of coffee and dark intent. "I don't accept resignations," he whispered. "You work for me until I say otherwise. and you live where I know you are safe. Fight me on everything else, Harper, but you will not win this." He pulled back, his eyes searching her face, waiting for her to break, to cry, to submit. Instead, she looked at the man who had just kidnapped her life, and she felt a cynical, twisted smirk tug at the corner of her mouth. The terror was gone. What replaced it was something much more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. "Fine," she said, her voice steady, "but I expect a raise." Roman stared at her for a long, quiet moment. Then slowly, a genuine, dark laugh ripped from his chest. It echoed off the concrete walls, heavy and real. "Get your bag, Harper," he said, the ghost of a smile lingering on his mouth. "Let's go look at your new apartment." The new apartment was located on the 42nd floor of a glass obelisk in Midtown. It smelled like ozone, expensive floor wax, and absolutely nothing human. She stood in the center of the kitchen, staring at a quartz countertop that was thicker than the door of her old apartment. Her cheap, chipped ceramic mugs, the ones she'd bought from a thrift store for 50 cents each, were perfectly aligned next to a brushed steel espresso machine that looked like it required a pilot's license to operate. "The doorman is named Victor," Roman said. He was leaning against the door frame, his hands tucked into the pockets of his slacks, watching her dissect the space. "He works the day shift. Marcus is on nights. Neither of them will let anyone up without my direct authorization. Not Dave. Not your brother. Not a delivery driver." She ran her fingers over the cold stone of the counter. It left no residue. It was entirely sterile. "And what if I order a pizza?" "You go down to the lobby and get it." She turned to face him. He hadn't stepped fully into the apartment. He lingered on the threshold, a massive, dark shadow against the bright, aggressively lit hallway. It was a calculated move. He was giving her the illusion of territory. "My clothes," she said, gesturing vaguely to the hallway where she assumed the bedroom was. "Your associate really packed them?" "Everything down to the bobby pins," Roman confirmed, his expression unreadable. "Your mail is being forwarded. Your landlord has been compensated for the broken lease and instructed to forget you lived there." She swallowed the lump in her throat. The sheer, terrifying scale of his resources was suffocating. She had spent 6 years scraping together rent, dodging collection calls for her student loans, fighting for every inch of stability in this city. He had erased her entire struggle in 6 hours before she'd even finished her coffee. It made her feel incredibly small and deeply, violently angry. "I'll pay you back for the rent," she said, her voice hard. "Take it out of my paycheck." Roman's jaw tightened. "I own the building, Harper. There is no rent." "Then charge me what it's worth, or I walk out that door right now and find a shelter." She was bluffing, and they both knew it. She had $12 in her checking account until Thursday. But she needed a boundary. She needed one single thread of control in a situation that was spiraling completely out of her hands. Roman stared at her, his dark eyes analyzing the stubborn tilt of her chin, the white-knuckled grip she had on the edge of the counter. He saw right through the bravado, peeling it back like wet paper. But he didn't call the bluff. $500 a month, he said quietly. Deducted post-tax. It was a laughable number for a midtown penthouse, but she nodded sharply. Fine. He tossed a heavy matte black key card onto the entryway console. It hit the wood with a dull thwack. "I'll see you at the office on Monday, Ms. Hayes. Don't be late." He turned and walked away. The heavy oak door swung shut, sealing with a heavy pressurized hiss. She was alone. She spent the weekend wandering the rooms like a ghost. The silence in the apartment was absolute. High-rise double glazing meant she couldn't hear the sirens, the traffic, or the angry shouts that usually bled through her old walls. It was a sensory deprivation tank, masquerading as luxury. She slept in the center of a king-sized bed that felt too vast. Her body curled into a tight defensive knot, waiting for a boot to kick against her door. The kick never came. Monday morning, the dynamic shifted. The air in the executive suite of Hale Logistics felt thicker, heavier. She wore her usual oversized beige cardigan and sensible flats, trying to project the image of the invisible, mousy assistant. But the invisibility cloak was gone. When she brought Roman his coffee at 8 a.m., the office was dead quiet. He was standing by the window, reviewing a shipping manifest. He didn't turn around. "Black, 2 sugars," she murmured, setting the porcelain cup on his desk. "You didn't sleep," he said to the glass. She froze, her hand hovering over the desk. She had spent 30 minutes applying concealer to the dark circles under her eyes. "I slept fine, Mr. Hale." He finally turned. He was wearing a dark navy suit that made his shoulders look impossibly broad. He stepped away from the window, closing the distance between them until he was standing just on the other side of the desk. The smell of his cologne, bergamot and smoke, cut through the smell of the roasted coffee. "Your hands are shaking," he observed, his voice dropping to that low, resonant frequency that vibrated in her chest. "Your eyes are bloodshot, and you flinched when the elevator chimed." "It's an adjustment," she said defensively, pulling her hand back and wrapping her arms around her waist. "It's too quiet there. It messes with my head." Roman watched her for a long, agonizing moment. "You miss the noise. You miss the threat of someone breaking in." "I miss knowing what to expect," she snapped, the cynical truth slipping out. "I know how to survive a cheap lock and a drunk neighbor. I don't know how to survive you." He didn't blink. He didn't offer a reassuring smile. He just leaned forward, planting his large hands flat on the desk, bringing his face level with hers. "You don't survive me, Harper," he said softly. "You just stop fighting." He picked up the coffee, took a sip, and looked back at his manifest. The conversation was over. The dismissal was absolute. She walked back to her desk, her skin prickling, acutely aware that the cage she was in wasn't made of glass and steel. It was made of him. The illusion of peace lasted exactly 4 days. Thursday afternoon, it rained. A cold, miserable downpour that turned the city streets into gray rivers. She was sitting at her desk, typing up the minutes from a volatile union negotiation, when the heavy glass doors of the executive suite violently banged open. Her head snapped up. Harry was standing in the reception area. Her older brother looked like a walking storm warning. He was soaking wet, his faded mechanic's jacket dripping onto the plush corporate carpet. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles bulged, and his knuckles were white as he shoved past the protesting security guard. "Where is she?" Harry bellowed, his voice echoing off the glass partitions. He smelled like damp wool, stale cigarettes, and cheap draft beer. The smells of her old life. She shot up from her chair, her heart leaping into her throat. "Harry, stop!" He spotted her. He pushed past the guard, boots squeaking obscenely on the polished floor, and marched toward her desk. He didn't look relieved to see her. He looked furious. "What the hell's going on, Harper?" he demanded, slamming his heavy hands down on her desk. The monitors rattled. "I go to your place to drop off your birthday gift early, and the super tells me you moved out in the middle of the night? No notice? No forwarding address?" "Harry, keep your voice down," she hissed, terrified, glancing frantically toward the closed solid oak door of Roman's office. "I tried to call you on Sunday, but your phone went straight to voicemail." "Yeah, my phone died. So what? You just pack up and vanish?" He leaned closer, his eyes wild, scanning her face. "Dave told me some guy in a suit threatened him with a gun in your hallway. Did you get into trouble? Did you borrow from a shark again?" "No, God, no." She reached out, grabbing his damp sleeve. "Harry, I'm fine. Dave got aggressive. He wouldn't let me out of my apartment. My boss—" "Your boss?" Harry scoffed, his gaze darting around the pristine office. "The logistics guy? Since when does a CEO do door-to-door security? You're lying to me, Harp. Tell me where you are living." "I can't," she whispered, the shame burning hot in her cheeks. "It's complicated." "It's not complicated," Harry snapped, his voice rising again. "You're coming with me. Get your coat." He grabbed her wrist. His grip was bruising, fueled by adrenaline and a deep-seated protective panic. She dug her heels into the carpet, pulling back. "Harry, let go! You're hurting me!" The solid oak door to Roman's office clicked open. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut through her brother's yelling like a physical blade. The temperature in the room plummeted. Roman stepped out. He didn't rush. He didn't look angry. He radiated a cold, absolute stillness that made the security guard step back and press himself against the wall. Roman's eyes locked onto Harry's hand wrapped around her wrist. "Remove your hand from my assistant," Roman said. Harry let go, not out of obedience, but out of sheer shock. He turned to face Roman, sizing him up. Harry was a brawler. He was used to settling things in alleys behind bars. He puffed out his chest, squaring his shoulders. "You the boss?" Harry sneered. "I'm taking my sister home. We're done here." "Your sister is at work," Roman replied evenly. He walked slowly toward them, his footsteps completely silent on the carpet. "And she is already home. She resides in a secure building now. A building where drunken cowards cannot kick her door in, and where hot-headed brothers cannot drag her out by her wrists." Harry's face flushed a dark, angry red. He took a step toward Roman, his fists clenching. "You think you can just buy her? You think because you wear a nice suit, you can own people? I don't know what kind of sick racket you're running, but she's blood. You don't get to keep her." She stepped between them, throwing her hands up against Harry's chest. The damp fabric of his jacket seeped through her cardigan. "Harry, please, just go. He didn't buy me. I'm safe. I swear to God, I am safe." Harry looked down at her, betrayal flashing in his eyes. "Safe? Look at him, Harper. Look at his eyes. That guy isn't a logistics manager. He's a shark. You traded a rat for a shark, and you're too stupid to see the teeth." Roman stopped 3 feet away. He didn't look at Harry anymore. He looked at her. He looked at the red mark forming on her wrist where her brother had grabbed her. The muscle in Roman's jaw ticked. A tiny, violent tremor. "I am not a shark, Harry," Roman said quietly, his gaze never leaving her face. "I am a wall, and I strongly suggest you stop throwing yourself against it." Roman reached into his inner suit pocket. Harry tensed, dropping into a defensive stance, expecting a weapon. Instead, Roman pulled out a silver money clip. He detached a thick folded business card and held it out. "That is a private number. If you need to reach your sister, you call that number. It goes through a vetted switchboard. If there is an emergency, they will patch you through to her. If you ever show up at my office yelling again, I will have you arrested for trespassing and assault. Do you understand?" Harry stared at the card like it was a live grenade. He looked from the card to Roman's dead flat eyes, and then down to her. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a hollow, sickening realization of just how outmatched he was. He snatched the card from Roman's fingers, shoving it into his pocket. He didn't say another word. He just turned, his wet boots squeaking sadly, and walked out the glass doors. She stood shaking in the middle of the floor, the adrenaline crashing, leaving her nauseous. The security guard quietly excused himself, disappearing down the hall. She looked at Roman. He was staring at the doorway, where Harry had vanished, his expression unreadable. "I hate you," she whispered. The words tasted like ash. Roman slowly turned his head to look at her. "I know. You humiliated him. You made him feel entirely powerless." "He hurt you," Roman said, his voice dropping an octave, raw and jagged. He took a step closer, his eyes dropping to her wrist. "He put his hands on you in anger. Blood or not, I will not tolerate it." "It's not your job to tolerate it," she shouted, the tears finally spilling over, hot and humiliating. "You don't own me. I am not a piece of cargo you get to secure." She turned to run to the bathroom, needing to hide, needing to breathe without the scent of his cologne suffocating her. But she didn't make it 2 steps. Roman's hand caught her arm. It wasn't a bruising grip like Harry's. It was firm, heavy, anchoring her to the floor. He spun her around, pulling her flush against his chest. "Let go," she choked out, pushing her hands flat against the stiff front of his dress shirt. "No." His arms wrapped around her, locking her in. One hand pressed against the small of her back, the other cradled the back of her head, burying her face in the curve of his neck. She fought him for exactly 3 seconds. She shoved, she twisted, she let out a frustrated, ugly sob. But he didn't budge. He just held her, a solid, immovable object absorbing all her kinetic panic. And then, horribly, pathetically, the fight left her. She collapsed against him, her hands curling into the expensive wool of his lapels. She breathed in the bergamot, the smoke, the faint smell of the rain on his coat. She was crying, ruining his shirt, ruining her cynical, independent facade. He didn't say it was going to be okay. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just held her tighter, his chin resting on top of her head, his thumb tracing slow, rhythmic circles against the tense muscles of her spine. She hated him for taking her brother's pride. She hated him for stripping away her illusions of control. But as she stood there, wrapped in the dark, suffocating warmth of a man who terrified everyone else in the city, the most terrifying realization of all finally hit her. She didn't want him to let go. It was a Friday night, exactly 2 weeks after the text message that ended her life as she knew it. She was sitting on the heavy velvet sofa in the Midtown apartment, a glass of cheap red wine in her hand. She had bought it from the bodega down the street, defiantly carrying the brown paper bag past Victor the doorman. She poured it into one of the massive, thin-stemmed crystal glasses that came with the apartment. The contrast felt right. It felt like her. The apartment was dark, illuminated only by the sweeping amber lights of the city grid below. The rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, a violent drumbeat that felt entirely separate from the quiet tomb she sat in. She took a sip of the wine. It tasted like vinegar and regret. At 11:42 p.m., the heavy oak door clicked. The sound of the deadbolt retracting was loud, mechanical, and heavy. She didn't flinch. She just turned her head and watched the door swing open. Roman stepped inside. He didn't knock. He had the master key card. He didn't wear an overcoat tonight, just a charcoal suit, his tie already pulled loose and hanging asymmetrical around his collar. He looked exhausted. The shadows under his cheekbones were carved deep, his eyes dark and heavy. He pushed the door closed, locking it behind him. He didn't seem surprised to see her sitting in the dark. "You're drinking swill out of a baccarat glass," he observed, his voice a low gravel in the quiet room. "It reminds me of my tax bracket," she replied, her voice steady. He let out a short, humorless exhale and walked toward the kitchen island, dropping a thick leather briefcase onto the marble. He didn't turn on the lights. He walked into the living area, stopping a few feet from the sofa. He just looked at her. The air in the room thickened, changing barometric pressure. The space between them was charged, crackling with the things they hadn't said since her breakdown in his office a week ago. Since then, he had been perfectly professional. A ghost. He gave orders, she executed them. But the silence had grown teeth. "You didn't submit your resignation," he said quietly. "You told me you wouldn't accept it. I told you a lot of things, Harper. You've never listened to me before." He took a step closer. The amber light from the window caught the sharp line of his jaw. "Why are you still here?" She looked down at the dark red liquid sloshing in her glass. She thought about the lie she could tell. She could say she was too poor to leave. She could say she was scared of Dave or scared of his retaliation. But she was tired of lying. She was tired of playing the victim when her own twisted desires were holding the gun. "Because I like the quiet," she said, looking up, meeting him dead on. "And because I realize something." "What?" "I realize that I'm terrified of you, Mr. Hale. But I'm more terrified of the world without you in it." Roman went completely still. It was the stillness of a predator that just realized the prey wasn't running. It was offering its throat. He closed the distance in 2 strides. He plucked the crystal glass from her fingers and set it on the side table. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for permission. He reached down, gripping her hips, and hauled her up off the sofa. Her breath slammed backward into her lungs. He backed her up, her spine hitting the cold glass of the window. The city spread out miles below her, a dizzying drop. But she wasn't looking at it. She was looking at him. "Say it again," Roman demanded, his voice a harsh, ragged whisper. His hands clamped around her waist, his thumbs pressing hard into the soft flesh beneath her sweater. "I'm not leaving," she breathed, her hands coming up to grip his wrists. His pulse was hammering beneath his skin, frantic and wild. "I'm staying in the cage." Roman let out a dark, guttural sound. He dropped his head, his mouth crashing down on hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. There was no romance in it. It was a collision. It was teeth and heat, and the bitter taste of dark coffee and exhaustion. It was the physical manifestation of 3 weeks of suppressed violence and agonizing restraint. She kissed him back with equal desperation. Her hands let go of his wrists, sliding up his chest, knotting into his tie. pulling him closer until the heavy brass buckle of his belt dug into her stomach. She opened her mouth for him, letting the darkness swallow her whole. He tasted like power. He tasted like the absolute end of her independence. And God help her, it felt like relief. His hand moved to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her frizzy hair, angling her head to deepen the kiss. The other hand slid around her waist, lifting her slightly onto her toes, crushing her against his solid frame. The cold glass was at her back, his burning heat in front of her. She was entirely trapped. When he finally pulled back, they were both gasping. Roman rested his forehead against hers, his chest heaving against her breasts. His eyes were closed, his breathing ragged. "You are mine, Harper," he whispered, the words vibrating against her lips. It wasn't a question. It was a brand. "I will burn the city to the ground before I let anyone touch you again, including your brother." She looked at the man who ran the underworld, the man who had bought her life with a text message and a black key card. She saw the possessive madness in his dark eyes, the terrifying absolute control he wielded over her existence. She should have run. She should have screamed. Instead, she slid her hands under his suit jacket, wrapping her arms around his waist, and buried her face in his chest. "I know," she whispered into the dark. "Lock the door." If you felt the tension in that silence and the messy, terrifying reality of Harper's choice, hit that like button. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a deep dive into the dark, cynical edge of romance, where control and safety blur. Want to see more gritty, grounded Mafia stories with raw, imperfect characters who break the mold? Share this video with someone who loves a truly dark romance. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next thrilling chapter of our storytelling. Drop a comment below. Would you have stayed in the gilded cage?